book. What's your book called?
Cloud Money. Cash, cards, crypto, and the war for our wallets.
Cloud money. So the book is about championing cash. Why normal people need cash, or?
Yeah, basically the book is a defense of the physical cash system against the enclosure of the banking sector, because basically digital money, all those cards you're tapping, right, all the apps you're using, you might think they're convenient, but they're also corporate. I mean, they're basically a type of corporate controlled money. And the way I sometimes talk about it, with a quick metaphor, I often say that cash is like the public bicycle system of payments, and digital money is like the private Uber system of payments. And again, you might be a person who finds that stuff convenient, but you don't want those private systems controlling the whole monetary system. So the book is basically saying we need to protect the cash system and keep balance in the monetary system. It also looks at crypto as well.
2 trillion yesterday, front page of the Sunday Times. 2 trillion has gone missing out of the cryptocurrency crash. They were saying that people
it hasn't gone missing. It was never there.
It was never there. But they were saying the crypto boys, they were flying around private jets. Last week they were on Ryanair.
Yeah, I used to actually work in the financial sector back in. Right during the financial crisis.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, we chatted when my first book came out in 2013. That was after I'd left that.
What was that book called again?
The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance,
yeah,
Hacking the Future of Money. But at that time, I remember back in 2008, 2009 and stuff, it was all the bankers who people were looking at with their, throwing all their money around and stuff. Now, of course, it's the crypto boys.
But I sort of like this. Is this true, right? Like, because this is what I've heard. Apple Pay. So the largest bank in the world is now Apple. So 2 years ago, they became the first company ever to go over £1 trillion or $1 trillion.
Well, market capitalization.
And this year, no one else went over £1 trillion. They've gone over 3, and it's all due to Apple Pay, which is apparently the world's largest clearing bank, or a type of clearing bank.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is what my book is actually going into, a lot of this fusion between big tech and big finance, right? Because if you think about what's going on you zoom out a bit in the global capitalist economy, and you say, what's the big trend happening? And the big trend is basically that about 2008, 2009, those times, the biggest companies in the world were banks and oil companies.
Yeah.
And then in the last 10 years, of course, these big tech companies have risen to prominence because they've sort of gained network effects. They've been scaling up. But those big tech companies basically cannot scale up unless they fuse into digital financial infrastructures. Think about the cash system. Amazon cannot operate with the cash system. It hates the cash system. It sort of slows it down. It can't, Amazon's a sort of giant like octopus, as it were, kind of a giant sort of like, globe spanning system. It can't stand physical money because it can't remotely control it, right? But of course, if you have a bunch of fintech companies and banks who set up these digital systems, then companies like Amazon and Apple can fuse into those. That's what we're seeing right now, is the fusion between big tech and big finance, and systems like Apple Pay are like one of those types of fusions. And
it's absolutely enormous. I'd like tap my phone all the time. That's all I do. I'm tapping it, tap, tap, tap. Come in.
Yeah. Well, that's a kind of corporate enclosure,
Yeah, but the whole thing about Apple Pay is that they were saying like Steve Jobs didn't even envisage it.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's something that's morphed. So they've taken over from, who's this other company? WorldPay.
Yeah, there's also these kind of...
so they're like a clearing bank, isn't it? So what it does, it takes money from you and gives it to me, 2 individuals. Not
but bear in mind, like, what the digital money, what the standard digital money system is basically bank accounts. I got a bank account, you got a bank account, and so on. And that money in your bank account is digital money. all right? But these banks, they need these intermediaries to tell them who's trying to move money from who to who, right? So they'll say like, so these intermediary companies will be coming in saying, hey, Brett's bank, pay Mark's bank, right? And then our banks will tell us. So there's all these intermediaries in between. So these players like WorldPay are doing things like that, right? And so there's this whole sort of conglomeration that when you're looking at what's called a cashless society, it's basically this corporate conglomeration, which involves the banking sector, who actually have the underlying accounts, then all those people who sort of intermediate in between, saying move money between those accounts, and also the big tech companies are now getting into all that, right? So we're seeing this huge kind of corporate conglomeration emerging around it. So when you see, for example, these shops that are going cashless, in a sense, what they're doing is kind of being absorbed into that big complex, right? And this is why the cash system is so interesting and so important right now. Is it's a one type of way, one way that you don't have to buy into that complex. And I don't want to romanticize the cash system, but in the context of our current situation, it's actually a very, very important thing to keep it.
Yeah, I went to the Royal Academy the other day. Went to buy a coffee. He said, "No, we don't take. We only take cash. Oh, we only take cards. We don't pay with cash."
Yeah, and they're basically pushing you into all the big corporates. And because most people, especially in, a lot of like European societies, people are often quite sort of reserved. They don't want to cause a fuss. They don't want to cause a scene. And they might actually. Most people would prefer to have more options, right? They would say, "I would like the option to use multiple different types of payments," right? Most people have that preference. But if a particular retailer comes and says, "We are going to force you to use this one," most people just go along with it. They say, "Okay, well, I guess I'll just do it," right? So people kind of like fold over in a sense, right? And what people should be doing is saying, keep open the choice.
But we can't do that with Amazon.
Yeah, but I'm talking more about these kind of like high street shops that are doing it. Companies like Amazon cannot operate with cash. I mean, they're digital. This is so but of course companies on the street can.
So why is it important that we have cash?
Well, as I said, I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons actually, but I had that metaphor to start off with. I was saying cash is like the public bicycle system of payments, right? Yeah. It doesn't exclude people. Anybody can use it. You don't have to be accepted by some giant institution before you're allowed to pay. All right, so it's very non-judgmental in a sense. If you're imagining, it's kind of like character. Just anybody can use it. It doesn't crash when the power goes down or when any systems goes down. When there's a cyber attack, it's extremely resilient actually. And actually, on that, the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the U.S., when there's hurricanes approaching in the U.S., they see a huge demand for cash. Besides, because people know when the power goes down, you don't want to be holding some kind of digital unit.
We need some cash.
It's actually a much more advanced form of money in many situations, right?
In COVID as well, lots of people started taking money out of the bank, didn't they? When COVID was
actually, this is a big aspect of the COVID pandemic. There was a huge spike in demand for cash. The reason for this is actually during crises, when when people have general low levels of trust in the economic system, they often retreat to safety. If you think about what cash is, it's your safest form of money. It's issued by the state, whereas that digital money you're holding is actually, and we can go into the subtleties of this, but the digital money you hold is actually privately issued money. So for example, if you have a Barclays account, that's privately issued sort of promises by Barclays, right? And this is why when people lose trust in the banking sector, they run to the ATMs and try to get their money out, right? Because when the banking sector is unstable, you don't want to be holding those units that the banks issue. You want state money. Yeah. So there's a lot of resilience problems that come when you can't access cash. But of course, cash preserves privacy as well, which is extremely important. And also, actually, one big overlooked aspect is actually cash promotes localization. Because if you, again, think about companies like Amazon, these huge globe-spanning companies, in order to create super large-scale corporate centralization, you've got to be able to spread across the world at great speed, right? And if you think about the cash system, it goes from person to person on a street. It's the kind of thing you associate with small businesses, peer-to-peer interaction, whereas to create a gigantic conglomeration, you have to have these digital systems be interacting with data centers, not with people.
Yeah, it's like I did a car boot fair like recently in Hayes, and what was really funny about it was there was no one had those little where you can tap it, and the ice cream man who I know, Mehmet, he had the van, and we were speaking because he's always in our park as well. And we were speaking afterwards, and he said to me, "That place is unbelievable." He said, "Not one person paid me by card." He said, "Every single person had cash."
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Car boot.
Right.
Well, there's a huge class dynamic to this as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you can go onto a street, and you can predict which places will accept cash and which ones won't.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very easy to see the aesthetics, as it were, of cashlessness. It's associated with yuppies. It's associated with it's a certain kind of like slick corporate aesthetic, right? Whereas as soon as you go to anywhere that's a bit more informal, a bit rougher, a bit more kind of rough around the edges, suddenly cash is there, and there's a reason for that, right? It's because basically it's a system that doesn't rely upon you being absorbed into some large-scale institution run by a bunch of like, rich guys.
Yeah.
And a lot of people around the world know that.
So we've got you're in Berlin at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're based in Berlin, but in the UK at the moment we've got a cost of living crisis. We've got some big bills coming, but also we've got wages lower than they were in 2008 with inflation. So I mean, it's tough on people for money now, and people want money, people want cash, but where can they find it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the cost of living crisis is a thing, something that would affect the whole. Well, inflation is something that affects the entire monetary system, not just, that's irrespective of whether you're using cash or whether you're using the digital money system, right? But one point I can make about that in relation to cash is that actually the post office has been seeing a big increase in demand for cash again, precisely because of the fact that actually many people who are on lower incomes will use cash as a way to budget.
Yeah.
Right, you want to actually be able to see and tangibly understand how much money you have.
Yeah.
Right, and this is a lot. If you go to any central bank surveys about the top reasons for using cash, to many people when they say the reason why we use it is that it's actually much easier for us to understand what our financial situation is with physical money.
I saw it on TikTok. This woman, she has all her money, and what she does every week, she gets her money out for the week, and she was counting it and putting it into clear bags.
Yeah.
This money's for petrol, this money's for food, and she had it all laid out.
Yeah, and actually, groups like Visa, which of course are the ones that will benefit hugely from cashless society. Visa has this website and these brochures that's called the benefits of going cashless, which they go and promote to various shop owners and stuff. And one of the things they put on there is they say basically people spend a lot more with digital money. So people spend a lot more with their cards, with their apps, right? Because all the sort of like
They see it, it's physical.
yeah, well, the psychological friction sort of removed in a sense. So actually, you spend between 25 to 40% more,
Wow.
depending on what's sort
Because
of.
if you've got cash, it's almost like I don't want to give it away. It's like a
Exactly.
physical thing. It's like
Yeah.
it's a £20 note.
No.
Do you know what I mean? I'm going to get change out of this.
Yeah, and we're tactile beings.
Yeah.
We're physical beings. Actually, it's easier for us to understand tactile, physical things. With these digital things, you sort of have a much more abstract sense of them, and you can very easily get into debt and so on. And actually, when you're looking at, say, the connection between, say, mental health and money, and especially people with disabilities and things like this, actually a lot of those digital systems are quite perplexing,
Yeah.
right? And you sort of, and
Yeah, it's
cash
true.
has a certain type of tangibility, which is actually easier for a lot of people who don't have those types of
Yeah, there was Tracy was here yesterday, and she was talking about she works with homeless people. She was talking about one of her clients being in complete fear of him having to go to the shop to fill up a key for the electricity, but he had to go and they just got him with a card, so he's going to have to go and give him the key and the card. I couldn't understand it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like the whole thing about cash is it's always promoted as dirty. It's always promoted as drugs.
Especially after the bars.
Yeah, they're like, why you do?
Convenient.
I know. So there's a barber shop that only takes cash. There's a barber shop that only takes digital. That's a bit of a dodgy That's the dodgy one. Do you know what I mean? It's the one that takes the cash.
Yeah, well, this is actually a cultural victory for the fintech, the card companies. They basically, over the years, have slowly but surely like convinced people that they've sort of changed the culture. Because if you think about your grandparents' generation, nobody felt ashamed for using cash. You weren't cast as being a criminal.
I used to go around with him. My dad used to tie it in freaking rubber
Yeah, there
bands.
was no sort of sense that you must be dodgy for this, right? Like this idea that you're dodgy for using cash is something that's been slowly pushed into the culture through endless advertising, endless sort of, and a lot of people sort of have internalized that story. You know, they've internalized. And the worst thing was that during the pandemic, all these stories that came out about somehow cash being a sort of disease vector. Now, this is completely unscientific, because if you go to, I'm based in Germany, the Robert Koch Institute, which is one of the world's most preeminent health institutions. I mean, these guys know what they're doing, right? They came out and said there is no connection between cash and COVID, right? Many institutions have now come out and said this. They say, and actually, the studies will show you that actually, for example, those automated checkout touch screens are more dangerous. Pin pads of card terminals are more dangerous. Trolley handles are more dangerous. All these things that people go on using, yet somehow it's continually presented as if somehow cash is the unique danger here. And it still happens in London. It's outrageous that nobody wears masks anymore, and all those other COVID measures have been removed, and yet these companies still say, oh, well, we don't accept cash for your own safety. I'm like,
all right.
What are you talking about?
People saying that?
Yeah, they will still say that. It's like, that was something you said that you could say, like, last year. Now, so they've used the pandemic to sort of push forward that cashless thing, and they're not going to pull it back now. So they've ratcheted it up, and that's really a win for them.
It makes sense for them not to want cash, because we were saying otherwise they got to employ like hundreds of thousands of people to count cash.
Well, not the shops, but the banks. I mean, the banks. It's not a big. It's so. Okay, let me introduce a quick metaphor to just kind of like highlight the politics of what's going on here. So one of the ways I will talk about this to people is to say, okay, let's just stop thinking about the banking sector for a moment. Let's think about casinos. Okay, so imagine I go to a casino with a bunch of cash. Right, so I've got, let's say, £100, right? And I go to the casino and I hand it over to the casino cashier. Now, what happens in this situation is they will take ownership of that £100, and they will give me £100 of chips, right? So those chips that I'm now holding are like a privately issued form of money, right? That you can use within the casino. So now there's two forms of money here. There's the cash, let's say you're the casino cashier, right? You got the cash behind the counter that you own, and then I got these chips, right? Now so just hold that in your mind there, but now let's not think about the banking sector. Actually, they do a kind of a similar thing, right? So when you go to the banking sector and you hand over cash, they take ownership of it,
and they give you things,
and they push you out these digital chips. Right, so you can think of them almost as being casino chips, but in digital form. So when you're looking at your bank account there and you see those numbers, you're basically looking at these privately issued digital chips that you now control. Now, when a bank says something like, hey, it's actually a big hassle for us to have these ATMs and these branches, and it's costly for us to deal with this cash. It's a little bit like a casino saying, you know what, like, we're going to stop you from getting your cash back. It's a hassle for us to redeem those chips back for the cash, right? And banks are using this now. They're presenting their cash handling facilities as if it was some kind of charity and some kind of big hassle that they're sort of encumbered with running. But really, it's part of the deal, right? Those digital units in your bank account are promises that they've issued to say you can get cash back. Right, so they're trying to renege upon their promises when they start complaining about the costs of handling the cash.
I mean, what's it like in Germany? Is it cashless? Is it as bad as London?
No, Germany actually has a very strong pro-cash culture for various historical reasons. One of them being that, especially in East Germany, there was the Stasi, the sort of state surveillance agents during the Cold War, and people became very aware of privacy at that time. How you could be watched.
Yeah.
So actually, people have got a very strong privacy consciousness in Germany, and and actually, so for Germans, it's actually often very, very normal to have this idea that you have a right to expect financial privacy. But in general, you'll actually find quite high resistance to corporate takeover in places like in Berlin and stuff like this, right? And I always don't quite know. When I come to the UK, it's quite startling to me sometimes how little resistance there is sometimes to these takeovers.
But I think it's what you said. It's like almost like convince people, because I think, in my own head, if someone's taking cash, it's like, I don't want to pay their tax. Do you know what I mean? Or it's relative to paying your tax, isn't it? Taking cash, or there's a trust, isn't there?
Well, I mean, look, if you want to
because now, if you're self-employed, they say just do this digital.
Yeah, so the tax authorities will definitely want to get rid of the cash system, but bear in mind again the broader politics. You've got to zoom out here. I mean, the vast majority of lost tax in the UK is due to corporate tax avoidance.
In fucking Cayman Islands.
Yeah, and bear in mind that the corporate tax avoidance system is facilitated by none other than the banking sector, who are the ones who control the digital money system that players like HMRC are now saying is somehow better for tax.
Yeah.
Right? Now, all those things, those Cayman Islands accounts, that's all the digital money system. That's not cash systems, right? So the banking sector facilitates huge amounts of tax avoidance all the time. But of course, historically, there are sort of small amounts of petty tax evasion that occur through sort of small retailers and stuff. And that might be the case. And actually, sometimes when you're looking at monetary systems, you've got to there's trade-offs. You can say, okay, fine, the cash system might allow for small amounts of tax evasion, but it's going to give us a bunch of other things. It's going to give us resilience in the monetary system. It's going to create inclusion.
Yeah.
It's going to allow for there to not be total corporate domination. These are all things that are worth keeping, right?
But people need money, don't they?
Yeah.
People need money at the moment. Everyone's skint, you know what I mean? Everyone's thinking like, I need some money. And like the first thing, a job is okay, but fucking hell, cash is so good, isn't it? Like, if you just give me some £50 and a bunch of £50 notes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a broader question of, support for people who are, struggling on low income.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, people on low income, how important is cash to them?
Yeah, very important. But bear in mind, something like, welfare systems, you could implement them in either cash form or in the digital money forms, right? So in some ways, that's a broad.
You can go to the post office and get it out in cash.
Yeah, that's a broader question. But certainly for many low-income people, they actually do prefer cash, right? But again, increasingly be made to feel ashamed for somehow using that. Actually, even I walk around London trying to use cash. I'm constantly shamed for it. You have these sort of shop attendants who now start to look at you as if there's something wrong with you.
Really?
Yeah. It's a cultural victory for the corporates, for the big tech and big finance. And this is, I don't know if you've there's this Italian theorist called Antonio Gramsci.
Yeah, I know.
Who talked about
in prison by Mussolini.
Yeah, exactly. And he talked about cultural hegemony. Yeah. Which is this idea that when large groups of people internalize the interests of a kind of ruling class and believe that it's in their own interests. So when I'm walking around and I see people saying, you're using the cash system, there's something wrong with it, I just see cultural hegemony there. I see like the Visa and MasterCard execs and the banking execs all like rubbing their hands, being, this is fantastic. We have people on the streets promoting our own interests for us. Yeah. That's pure cultural hegemony.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's it there, isn't it? I've done some Gramsci related to the media, and I always look at it, so it's how the rich and the wealthy keep power, how they keep their land, how they keep their positions. And I always look at it, like, I did it with David Graeber.
Yeah.
We did a thing about all these programs that they make, like The Crown and Downton Abbey. So these are all cultural things to keep people, like what you're saying. they're like fucking proper victories. This is your position. This is how it should be. This is like, you know, all of those programs, all of the sort of like nationalism, all of the things that the Tories who get on about.
Absolutely.
Like the Queen, everything to do with like.
And it's really scary when you encounter it, because if you're a person who, you know, you dug below the surface of this stuff and you're trying to do, say, activism around it, it's one thing when the corporate sector attacks you, but it's another when people who are actually being screwed by the corporate sector attack you, because they've internalized their story. And then that's a real challenge.
Oh, I've got to be guilty for that then. I feel it. Do you know, like things that you're saying? Because, like, I do. I think, like, when people have money and things, so, like, do you know what I mean? It's so easy to get caught up in it, isn't it? To believe the shit.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, when you think about, like, you know, wow, why do they want that money? Do you know what I mean? I think, you know, do you know what? I grew up on fucking Oxford Street, like, selling dodgy perfume. Do you know what I mean? It was all about money. We used to give money to the girls on the outside, and what we would do, we'd give them £20 and we'd be on the box and we'd be like saying like Chanel, fucking Gramsci, do you know what I mean, all these brands. We'd be going like, oh look at that, she'd be nudging the guy beside him going, buy that one, do you know what I mean, and she would have the money to buy it. Fucking hell. Yeah, I mean, cashless society is like on its way. Can it be stopped? I don't know.
I think it can be, actually.
But what if they just stop printing money?
Okay, so there's some things going on in the background so while it's true that the corporate sector, big tech, big finance, definitely have been trying to crush the cash system, in terms of maintaining the resilience of the monetary system, that's not actually in their interests. Yeah, so you know, individual corporations will often do things. They're trying to optimize their own profit, but collectively they can kind of screw themselves over. You know, when they all do the same thing, right? So a lot of these banks have been undermining the cash system. These fintech companies, these card companies, they've all been doing various forms of attacks on the cash system. And now, actually, what's going to happen is a lot of like state officials, for example, the central bank, are realizing that this actually poses severe risks for financial stability. So even if you're quite like a sort of centrist person, a political centrist, a very sort of middle of the road, you know, central banker, you're starting to see that actually this could pose a real problem for just keeping the normal market system going, right? So there's now you'll start to hear central bankers saying, okay, shit, we've potentially got ourselves into a problem here. You know, we've allowed the cash system to get undermined, but if that actually happens, we could have severe problems of financial instability, you know, panics.
But in this country, they just print more, no? Like in after the banking crash and during COVID, they printed like how much in quantitative easing, or they don't print it.
Bear in mind, that's a different thing to the protecting of the cash system, because they don't print when they're doing quantitative easing. They're issuing digital money.
Yeah.
They colloquially will say printing money, but actually,
but there's only one. We control our own currency in this country, don't we?
Yeah.
So it's only one currency, so they can make as much of it as they like.
Yeah, but that's what the way that they will do that is that they will, the central bank will credit digital money into the accounts of the banking sector.
But that's why every time I hear it, they can never go broke.
Yeah, sure. That's true.
Yeah,
because they're the issuer of issue of money.
And they it's what you said. If they make £1 trillion, which they did already in quantitative easing, or 985 billion, they don't give it to us. They give it to the banks.
Yeah, well, it's
They could have put it in for instance, they could have put it in public service infrastructure. For instance, they could have invested in other things like that with the quantitative easing money.
Yeah,
right?
You got to kind of separate out though what they use the quantitative easing for, or issuing new money for, versus how they do it. So even if they would be spreading it to ordinary people, they would still do it via the banking sector.
Yeah.
Right. The central bank very seldom comes out and hands cash out to people physical form. It will credit accounts.
Do they call that helicopter?
Yeah, that's an example of helicopter money. Yeah.
Helicopter money.
Yeah, and actually the big politics of money issuances.
You heard of that? Where the helicopter just comes and gives everyone money. But that's how you because we create our own money.
Yeah.
But they could do that, couldn't they? Like in all those situations, like the
Sure.
banking crash.
This is the question. Whenever you have any kind of crisis, and you got to think about, the way I think about economic systems it's like these huge meshes of people who are all connected together. All right. And so all of us are connected together by these huge monetary systems, right? So, and you got to think of it as these huge like circuits that are kind of like connected together. And when you're trying to make interventions into that system, so when these politicians are saying, okay, who do we target when we give handouts? Do we target the big players and then hope that they give to the smaller players, or do we?
That's what they've been doing, and what everyone's shouting about. It's not just the helicopter money. They've been talking about universal basic income, where they give everyone.
Well, the UK government is very captured by the banking sector and also by the landlord class. So one of the things they immediately think of is to say, okay, shit, if tenants can't pay their rent, what's going to happen to landlords? And if landlords go down, what's going to happen to the mortgage, the banks? Yeah. Right. So they think like this. They're like, okay, to save the banking sector, maybe help out the landlords, which maybe means doing some kind of like rent support thing. So that they're thinking about how to save the banking sector often in this process. Right. They very seldom start with saying, okay, let's just give to ordinary people, and then the corporates can be dealt with later.
Have you heard of that universal basic income? So it's where they give. It's a proper thought out plan, isn't it?
I mean, universal basic income is
give everyone money.
Yeah, universal basic income is a variation on welfare.
Okay.
So the traditional way that welfare would be done is, the state pull money out.
But I heard it was just to everybody.
Yeah, but think about normal welfare.
Yeah.
It doesn't go to everybody. It's targeted.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, not true. Child benefit goes to everybody.
Yeah, everyone with the child.
Everyone with a child.
So again, it has a criteria, whereas universal basic income wouldn't have a criteria.
All right. Yeah.
All right. So but it often would involve the same mechanism, but just sort of spread out much more sort of. So there's a lot of debates about whether universal basic income.
I like all the other ones as well. Universal basic services. Free buses, free internet.
I think that's a good one. Yeah. I actually also like Varoufakis's one, which is the universal basic equity, where a portion of every big company has to go into ownership of the public.
Oh yeah. John McDonnell had that as well.
I think that's actually that's quite. I like that.
I like that too. Yeah. So basically, every company has to give the workers, wasn't it? With the people involved in the company.
Yeah, but
you own it. You have a part of it, whatever percentage it was.
But also actually the public more generally, because if you think about these massive, firms, especially like these big tech firms, a lot of the value that their stock market value is based upon actually us giving them data.
Yeah.
Right? And
data's like everything, isn't it?
Yeah, so actually there's a big case to say that we should be actually being given shares in these companies.
Are we ever going to get a Varoufakis government or anywhere ever? Do you know what I mean? Or like, any kind of sort of, socialist on the way that, all the things that we have in this country that are socialist, like the NHS and all things like that, everyone pays in for. Like, I don't understand why we still got still voting these people in. It's a freaking joke.
Yeah.
It's like what you said, it's with the fintech, when they win, and people are actually doing the work for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? But that's the media, isn't it? That's me painting these front page headlines. Do you know what I mean? Every day, it's like the headlines are just more and more bizarre.
Yeah. A big strategy historically with a lot of your kind of like the Tories, for example, is to get people to not think about the bigger picture, but to sort of just focus on the very sort of small part of they're a part of a pie, as it were, If you zoom out and you look at the big picture, you often will see that you're being exploited. But if you focus in on your very sort of blinkers, you can buy into a lot of the conservative ideology and say, okay, I'm just going to go to work and work hard and do all these things. And actually, it's a very easy message to give to people. It's often much harder to show people how they're being exploited.
So
actually,
work is like fucking. That is a big win, isn't it, for them to get people to understand. Like, if I don't go to work, this Frankie Boyle said this to me, the comedians. If I don't go to work, I'm fucked. And he said, no. If I don't go to work, they're fucked.
Exactly. And this is always, if you always see how these things are framed. You know, the one that I really annoys me a lot is job creation. So they'll say things like, oh, you know, billionaires create jobs.
Bullshit jobs.
And what I would say is like, no, all the people who are being hired create billionaires.
Yeah.
All right. You cannot be a billionaire unless all the other people are doing the work for you. All right. And so this whole idea that somehow like there are these sort of magical, powerful billionaires who are sort of granting charitable jobs to everybody. It's like, no, they are billionaires because they're harvesting from lots of people who they hire.
No kidding.
Exactly, right?
What's it called? Pareto distribution. Is that what it's called? The Pareto distribution.
I don't know. I wouldn't know the exact term, but yeah, certainly. If you think about like economies as ecosystems, in a sense, like you have these, there's only a certain number of billionaires that you're going to have, right? Because not everybody could be a billionaire. Because, I mean, to be a billionaire, it's a little bit like if you think about, if you zoom back in time to like the pyramids and these times of, you know, there can only really be one pharaoh, because the pharaoh actually requires like tens of thousands of people to actually build the pyramids, right? And so they're the ones who almost like construct the power of the pharaoh. And many of these big companies are like this. The CEOs, the billionaires only exist because there's all these, you know, billions of others doing the actual work, right? And so all this ideology that, you know, anybody could become a billionaire, anybody could be this person, I mean, it's total bullshit, right? But it's very powerful, keeping people sort of running on that rat race.
No, so it's just going to be like, if anyone says anything, no, I only take cash. Hey.
Yeah.
Oh, nice one. How many minutes have we been doing up there? It's in the black box.
37.
37 minutes. Right. Have we got any questions?
Bitcoin.
Right. Can you read those questions? Because they now.
Sorry, somebody was talking about Bitcoin. I saw that.
Okay, tell them about Bitcoin. Why is it so volatile? Why is it so rubbish? Why is the guys who were flying around private jets now flying around Ryanair?
Bitcoin, it's a big topic. Where do I start? Bitcoin.
Can you write a book about it?
Yeah.
You wrote a book.
But it's, you know, I have a lot of experience with Bitcoin, don't get me wrong, but it's just, it's a tricky one to talk about. So, okay, the first thing I'd say about Bitcoin is that actually a lot of the components that went into the creation of Bitcoin came out of the 1990s, of the cypherpunk movements, which were activists and technologists who were looking forward in time and saying, shit, in some future cashless society, we could be in trouble. You know, we're gonna have extreme corporate and state domination. And in that future, if it comes to pass, we need some alternative form of, you know, digital cash to act as some kind of counterpower. And so it's important to realize that, you know, some of the intuition behind the Bitcoin world was a kind of fear of this corporate and state domination, right? And various components came together that were built in the 1990s that were sort of put into a kind of recipe that we now call Bitcoin. And the sort of second thing that I would say, though, is that it actually hasn't achieved that goal. All right. So while the intuition might have been that, you know, we need to form this alternative kind of digital cash, it hasn't actually done that. What it's actually done is to create a kind of a class of, I'm just going to call them digital collectibles, all right, that can be traded within the actual monetary system. And this is where lots of people get confused, because Bitcoin, when you look at it, you know, even just on a visual level, it sort of like looks like a monetary system. You'll see like numbers on the screen, you'll see this like monetary branding, you'll see a lot of monetary language around it. So a lot of people, it's sort of very, it has a kind of surface appearance of looking like a monetary system. But actually what there are these kind of collectible digital objects that are priced in money, and that can be moved around. All right. Probably the easiest sort of physical analogy to think about is if you walk into like an antique store and you saw like a kind of, imagine there's some kind of like medallion that's got the sort of shape of money and it kind of really looks like money, but then it has a price on it saying, £50. That's a kind of like a collectible object that looks like money, but
It's collapsed though, Bitcoin, isn't it?
yeah, so the price of those objects goes up and down, right?
But it's completely collapsed. It was like they were worth like 30,000, now they're worth about 3p.
No, it hasn't gone down that far. It's gone probably went down by about 40% or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 trillion went missing, or 2 trillion's gone.
This is in the broader crypto market though, because Bitcoin was the first
Yeah.
of the crypto tokens, but there's a whole bunch of other ones.
Yeah.
Right?
So loads of those have just gone completely.
Yeah, so it's quite hard to talk about the sort of crypto world more generally because there's so many different types now.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard to generalize about it, but certainly there was a massive crash, and one of the reasons for it is that these digital collectible objects are just highly volatile because they're not really connected into anything in the world. They're just sort of like it's very easy to kind of like push their prices up and down.
Yeah.
And so they're very, very subject to sort of both big spikes in price, but also big crashes in price. And
So the banks and the sort of like uptown, where is it, the Royal Exchange, or like where they trade, that got involved as well with Bitcoin, didn't it? Well, they started betting. I was out at an exhibition in Soho, and some random guy came in. They had 2 visitors with his friend. They both had Versace shirts on. They go, "Oh, you're the artist taxi driver." And I was going, "Yeah, like that." I said, "Fucking hell, where'd you get those shirts from?" They're proper, one was the goddess on the back. It was so beautiful, these shirts.
yeah.
And he had a solid metal Bitcoin debit card. Have you ever seen one of those?
Yeah, sure.
I was like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm betting on Bitcoin." So he was basically waking up every day betting whether it was going to go up or down.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the basic. The confusing thing with Bitcoin is that like in reality it's like any other kind of speculative investment. So for example, you could bet on shares, you could bet on house prices, you could bet on, there's many things you can bet on, artwork, rare postage stamps. These are all things that you take money, you buy them, and you try to resell them for more money later, And Bitcoin's now it's a new entrant to this generalized, thing you can bet on. But its unique feature is that it presents itself as being money at the same time. Right. So people are constantly have a bit of a cognitive dissonance because they will price it in dollars and pounds, but they will sort of be told all the time that actually what it is a kind of a monetary system. When in reality, it's this actually.
But he like everyone else, he was just reducing it back to money anyway.
Yeah, most people do treat it as a speculative object that you bet on.
Yeah.
But the sort of marketing of Bitcoin always tries to sort of like make out that what it really is a sort of competing monetary system. But that's what it really is.
About these other things that they've been having, NFTs, like some artists in the art world. What's that all about?
Yeah, NFTs are far more straightforward. NFTs are just like a loose digital claim upon some kind of like, for example, some kind of digital art.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you can bet on those. In some ways, that's a kind
Some of those they've completely collapsed. I saw some guy on the Twitter. He said, "Fucking hell, I had a monkey. It was worth paid like £60,000 for it. It's worth about 60 quid now."
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've got to think. This is the thing. Like in.
But like as an artist, some of that is some of the worst art I've ever seen in my life. It's really shit. It's so shit. It's unbelievable. John Terry, the footballer, he put his name on Twitter. Say, "Oh, I fucking just bought this for my wife," and I was thinking, That's fucking shit, mate. I was like, what the
I think in 5 years' time, there's gonna be a very, well, not even 5 years, probably less than 5 years. There's gonna be a lot of like cringe factor around NFTs. People will realize, but if you're gonna, like, again, if you want to see what's happening here, in the global economy, you can almost see it as these sort of onion layers of like, at the base layer, you have agriculture and energy. These are things that you just can't go without, right? This is like your actual real stuff, and then you kind of have these like more and more sort of like bullshit piles up on top, right?
Yeah.
And at the very sort of top levels, you have this like pure speculative capital that just sort of flies into anything, right? And if you think about the NFT world, you have these very sort of constrained supply digital objects. And even if a very small amount of speculative capital flows into it, it causes these massive spikes in the price.
Yeah.
But then people get bored very quickly, right? And actually,
especially if it's shit though, because art isn't just. There's a general consensus around art. Do you know what I mean? That artists become popular not just because quite often it's because they're quite good artists, but the NFTs seem to like not take that in. They were just producing art, which was really quite random. Some of it just quite. Not just generic, it was all the fucking same. It was just all these monkeys.
What people are basically doing is that they realize that there's a bunch of like speculative capital in the world, and then if you just catch the wave at the right time, even if you're producing bullshit, you can just catch it and jump off, right? But then you don't want to be the person who's there, 3 weeks later when people realize how bullshit it is, right?
But whoever you bought that off of, do you know what I mean? If I bought one of those monkeys off someone and they fucking, I'd be fucked, do you know what I mean? I'd be so upset.
Yeah.
Because you spent like 60 grand on it. It's like, fucking hell.
The confusing thing about NFTs right now is that like...
I sell my paintings for like 5, 10, 20 pounds. Be like, gutted. No, but it's all relative value, but like, who convinced, how did fucking John Terry, do you know what I mean? Don't even... Did you see Mendy yesterday? I can't wait to see Francis in the football. We missed the ball. But I think, like, all that sort of like footballers getting involved in art, do you know what I mean? That's what happens. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And people, it's true, people see NFTs. Like how many people, family members, old friends, said to me, like, you should get into NFTs. I was like, you just chop me out.
Yeah, that's when you know. That's when you know there's a. But this has been happening for a long time. This like big financial, speculative manias. There's a long history. Probably the most famous one, of course, is the tulip bubble. If you've heard of this. But I guarantee back when the tulip bubble was happening, there were a bunch of charlatan kind of promoters going around to poorer people saying...
because they've done the South Sea one as well, didn't they?
Yeah, there would have been these promoters going around to poorer people saying, you want to escape poverty, bet on this, right?
Oh, so these are bubbles. Fucking Bitcoins and NFTs, this is all bubbles.
Yeah, and the problem is that, if you catch the right side of it, you can actually make a bunch of money. And then unfortunately, sometimes, for example, you might have a poverty-stricken artist who happens to get it right. Yeah. And then they go around being like, oh, this empowered me, it saved me from poverty. And it's like, no, what happened is you managed to catch just the right part of a speculative wave. And now you're telling everybody else to get into it, and then it crashes, right? So it maybe helps a couple of people escape poverty, but then it bankrupts a whole bunch of other people. And this has been going on for like hundreds of years in capitalist systems, as these speculative manias, and also people who claim that you can escape, you can get liberation through speculation. Yeah. Right? So there's a lot of the history of charlatans who will do this. So in some ways, a lot of the NFT stuff isn't that different. It's just a new variation on that principle.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like when we were talking about data earlier on. Data is really fucking important. If you've got the data, then you've got everything. When they say, oh, data's the new oil, it's like if you got like a t-shirt and you had them in this shop, you're going to get how many people walking past if you've got a black t-shirt. But if you've got like a black t-shirt for sale on the internet, and you have the data of like 100,000 or 1 million people that typed in the words buy a black t-shirt. It's different from having a shop. You've got to be an idiot to have a shop.
Yeah, but then on the internet you're also competing with hundreds of thousands more people.
Yeah. Sure. So there's only this one shop in the street. But I still think it's opened it up for artists, like the internet. So I'm sort of like pre-internet as well. Like I remember being at, you know, painting, thinking, oh, if I had an exhibition, oh, if I could sell a painting, I'd be so happy, just like one. But now it's possible to sell loads, do you know what I mean, on the internet.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite, you know, I think that's quite liberating for, no, you don't have to, look at the music scene. So, like, you used to have to sign record contracts, Atlantic, or fucking Warner Bros, or whatever, like HMV. But now, Stormzy, JME, like fucking gigs, all grime artists, they all started about 10 years ago, setting up their own record company, putting their music directly onto Apple, Spotify. They get 100% of the profits.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I'm looking at economic systems, I'm often thinking about trade-offs, you know, contradictions. So the point with digital systems, you know, is not to say that there aren't benefits to them.
Yeah.
It's like, it's to say, what are you getting with that? What's the dark side, you know? And you know, in public debate, often you're sort of forced into one or the other, but in reality, there's just a lot of contradiction.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, it's true, for example, that you might disintermediate the record companies in some ways, but now you've got a new mega platform that has control over your ability to even exist as an artist, right? So if you're not on Spotify now, you get screened out.
Yeah.
So now suddenly you've transferred power in a new way, right?
Yeah,
So there's a new configuration of power there. And the point is to sort of, you know, you can debate which.
I remember there was this, she's like a prog rock, I'm not a big fan of her music or her in particular, but her name's Amanda Palmer. And she did, so she signed up to like whoever it was, HMV or Atlantic Records, no, Sony, and they gave her like £1 million, or they had £1 million to produce an album, and they sold 15,000 copies of the album, but they got dropped straight away after the first album. They said, you only sold 15,000, we can't do it anymore. Do you know what I mean? But like, they got their money back through the sale of the album, so like no one was out of pocket. Do you know what I mean? But Amanda Palmer then went and crowdfunded for the second album, but they were like a sprawling band, prog rock. There's like about 30 members or something stupid. But they crowdfunded it and got 15,000 people to donate to the crowdfund, and they got £1 million. So they got that for themselves this time, without like it ever going back to anyone. Do you know what I mean? Like rather than HMV.
Yeah, I mean it can happen, but you know, I think in reality right now, for example, with the early rhetoric of empowerment through digital systems often starts to like dissipate. I remember, for example, when I don't know, do you remember the sharing economy? There was this concept like 10 years ago of the sharing economy, which is like, okay, we're not going to use big companies, we're going to like actually anymore. It's basically like we're a big corporation and we like control the
They
times.
looked at it for long term, didn't they? It
Yeah.
really went. It was. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
But the early rhetoric of Uber was all about we're empowering the individual person to run their own business. And like Uber no longer pretends, they no longer say this, right? And I think it's quite similar with lots of these early kind of like crowdfunding systems. It's true that like a bunch of people were able to maybe survive. For many artists right now, if you're on Spotify, for example, you're making very, very little money. The vast majority of money on Spotify is going to Ed Sheeran and the top players who basically take huge cuts of the overall take.
Yeah, you got to push yourself through like families and friends. But I think the idea of like that sharing economy or whatever it was, and Uber, they've done all that at the beginning. They put so much into it, and I've only just learned about this whole lost leader. How are we doing? Come and sit down, join us. Look, we're live streaming on YouTube. This is Brett Scott. He's talking about the importance of cash.
Importance of cash.
Amongst other things.
But we're talking like, I was just wanting to say this thing about lost leader. So I only learned about it through David Cameron. So David Cameron, he left power. He had £40 million when he left power, but he came back with this company called Greensill, who paid him like, I think it was like or however much it was, 3-4 million or what. And he wanted to become, so their idea, their plan was this app that would pay key workers, NHS workers, who normally get paid 2 days after they told that they get their pay slip. They were going to pay them the day they got their pay slip. But they weren't going to, but it was called a lost leader. So it's this idea of like, all they wanted to do was get a government contract.
They want to get market dominance through losing money.
Yeah, but so what it is, it's like you do something for nothing, and then you get the money later. Do you know what I mean? When your company grows, or when you like. So their basic idea was get one government contract, lose money on it, or just things. But now you're an official government contractor. You can get more and more and more.
Yeah, and then it's a license to print money. It's sucking on the government teeth. They call
I
it
know,
in the
it's
US.
sucking on the government's teeth. Yes, it's true.
Yeah, but you can kind of like bludgeon your way into dominance in a market through doing. If you've got big backers, and you can just prepare to lose money, you can get that dominance, and then later like turn up the crank and then get the money.
Uber was backed by BlackRock and George Osborne, and George Osborne was
that's what
fucked
the
up.
Monopolies and Mergers Commission are there for, to stop that happening, that much market dominance, but they're fucking useless a lot of the time. Because you just get 2 or 3 market dominators who are all, they don't speak to each other at all, but they have the same price structure and the same profit.
But look at the massive digital companies like Amazon or Apple. They've got massive market dominance. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And they even buy. Their financial model is to like just keep buying up everything else. Do you know what I mean? Not just buying the competition, owning and taking them out completely.
Well, Jeff Bezos was making something like, I'm trying to think what the figure was, 207 million maybe per
day.
It's an enormous amount. So Amazon itself probably it makes something like last year it was making something like $14,000 per second.
Yeah.
All right. So
you're paying 0 tax.
If you imagine like many people, it takes them a whole year to, in low incomes to make 14,000, right? Amazon's making every single second. And it's precisely because it's managed to extend across the whole world and it's taking a cut out of all these, to get to that scale, this is what the Amazon plan is. You need to automate it, and you need to have this.
So that was lost leaders, but their financial model which is with a lot of these corporations and the way that they don't pay tax is any profits you make is reinvested in something else. So you're just growing all the time. So if you make 10 billion this year, you buy 10 billion worth of other properties, other like companies. So at the end of the year, you got no tax to pay. So what happens with that is your company's growing, but then the main players like Bezos taking out in dividends every year and pay their tax in the fucking Cayman Islands or wherever else. But the idea, their financial model is always to reinvest every penny.
Yeah.
Every penny of profit goes back into buying something else.
Yeah, so that's a recipe for market domination.
But quite often that reinvestment is buying stuff at really inflated prices from companies that they own.
Yeah.
So then that comes out, get off their tax, they write it off against their tax, but they're paying 400 times over the odds for the service to a subsidiary.
It's transfer pricing. You'll do cross country, and because corporations are, they're not single companies. They're these giant conglomerations of companies held together through subsidiaries, as you say, and then they can like do business with each other, internal to the company. I mean, I did a project with a group in Berlin called Open Oil, where we were mapping out the corporate structure of BP. And BP was at that time, at least, it was several years back, but it was 1,100 companies, right? That's what BP is. It's actually 1,100 companies strung together in 12 tiers deep. So that you have a mothership company, it owns a bunch of companies here, which own a bunch of companies, and this goes 12 layers deep.
Who's got the time to do all that?
Well, their lawyers do, because they construct these huge elaborate things.
No, but that's what you think as an individual. Do you know what I mean? If you wanted to sort of like reinvest your money, your profits, say like you're, I don't know, a plumber, for instance. So for you to grow your business as a plumber, would be to take any profits that you had, or any, if you had any, do you know what I mean, spare cash, and reinvest it, do you know what I mean, in more staff, or reinvest it in more goods, or...
You buy a little pipe manufacturing company,
Yeah,
buy
yeah,
pipes
yeah.
from it, really high prices,
Yeah.
and then the plumber doesn't make any money, and then they buy the steel from someone else that you own.
Yeah.
You know, it's all just all down the line.
Have you ever seen it?
Eventually there's enough layers that it just disappears and no tax is paid
I was
in.
coming down from Sheffield the other day, the other week, and went past an Amazon factory. I don't know where it was. Fucking massive.
Yeah.
It was just like a big warehouse. It was just like went on forever. And then there was another warehouse at the end of that, and another warehouse. And seen this film, Nomads,
No.
with Francis McDermott? You've seen it?
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's fucking incredible.
That was
So they live out in the desert, but at the beginning they're all working for Amazon in this fucking factory. But it's all really filmed, you know what I mean? So there's Francis McDermott and all the nomads are real people. And that whole fucking Amazon factory is real. Unfucking believable.
I saw this one advertised actually.
No, go watch that. It won the Oscar, didn't it? Or he won something.
Sure,
It's
okay.
so fucking cool. But I like the idea of the nomad. The nomads were really cool.
Well, I mean, you've seen the size of the data centers. You know,
Yeah.
the factories. The data centers are enormous. You know.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, but you off? You're not staying for knitting then?
No,
We've got a knitting.
no,
what
I'm
time's
expecting
knitting?
to come back to have a fully knitted three-piece suit tomorrow
Yeah.
morning and the wall to be fixed.
Yes.
Okay, I'll see you
Hey, nice
tomorrow.
one. Take care.
I'll see you.
Hey, how many? What are we up to? Wind up now. Ask them if they got-
61 minutes.
Ask them if they got any questions. Anyone got any questions? How many people we got watching right now? It says it on the left.
62.
62 people.
Yeah.
Get 10,000 later on. And then everyone gets home. Alright then, thank you Brett for coming along, that was fucking amazing.
Oh, it's cool to be back.
So that'll be up there, it'll go directly onto YouTube as soon as we thank you for coming as well, our friend over here.
Alright.
One of these buttons turns it off.